at Rutgers University in anthropology in the human evolutionary sciences side. Like Professor Cully said, I am Professor Cronk's student, and so the focus is human behavioral ecology and cooperation, stuff like that is sort of the focus. And I'm really excited about this panel because although academia appeals to us all, I think it's nice to know that about the other options out there, especially because it's such a competitive field. And it's nice to know what anthropology can be used for, especially because it can apply to so many broad areas. But if you guys wouldn't mind, just maybe going around saying your name, your current role, and maybe like, a line or two about your background in anthropology. Maybe we could start with Dr. Boyle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eve Boyle. I am literally on day 2 of a new job. I am coming to you live from the Maryland State Department of Labor. Um, I've been working in the science policy field for the 5 or 6 years since I've gotten my PhD. And my background in anthropology, I got my bachelor's degree at Boston University in anthropology, and then I got my PhD at the George Washington University. And my research was focused on paleoanthropology and specifically the evolution of the torso skeleton and whether that correlated to a human diet, which I found that it didn't. I'm happy to
Spoiler
pass
alert.
it along.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Garcia, would you mind going next?
Um, all right, hi. So I am currently at Blue Shield of California, the health insurance company. It's not really a popular space to be in. But this position is quite unique in that I work really closely with the health equity team, which goes back to kind of my historical interests from when I was in my PhD program and beyond. And I have a PhD in biological anthropology from University of California, Santa Barbara. I studied under Mike Gervin and Aaron Blackwell there. And my work was always focused around understanding health disparities, and in particular, to get very nerdy, it was looking at the impacts of like social and environmental stressors on the regulation of the biological systems that underpin chronic disease. So like your HPA axis and your stress response system and how it regulates your inflammatory immune system, and can result in uh, a lot of chronic diseases, but I say diabetes in particular.
Very interesting. Dr. Gray?
First off, it's weird to be called Dr. Gray anymore. I'm just Peter.
Okay.
So that's one of the differences in context. I earned my bachelor's degree back in the last millennium. I was an anthropology undergrad at UCLA, earned my PhD in biological anthropology at Harvard. I worked with Peter Ellison, Frank Marlowe, and several others on testosterone and male family life. Did a 2-year postdoc in clinical endocrinology, focused on in a group focused on testosterone administration. Was an anthropology professor at UNLV for 17 years. So I think, the elder statesman of this panel, leaving around age 50 just a few years ago for a new life in research, applied research at TIAA, a leading retirement provider based here in Metro Charlotte, North Carolina. And our primary client is still higher ed. So in that sense, I still have one foot in higher ed. But it's been a wild ride the last few years to be here. But I'm Peter. Dr. Gray is weird, or Professor Gray is weird.
As a grad student, I'm almost incapable of using a first name of any former professor, so I'll do my best. Dr. Kate?
Hello, I'm Erin. I got my BA in Anthropology and Environmental Studies from Washington University back in 2010, and my PhD from The Ohio State University, where I was studying Diana monkey ecology and behavior in response to changing food availability. And then I did a postdoc in Cheryl Knott's lab at Boston University, where I was studying how orangutans cope with changing food availability and how that affects life history in particular. And then after I was unable to get an academic job, I moved over to the BU Medical School, where I'm now scientific program manager for the section of computational biomedicine. And so I oversee all of the large collaborative grants that work on early detection of lung cancer.
Wow, very cool. And Dr. Matthews.
Hi, everyone. I am Luke Matthews. I'm an anthropologist at Rand Corporation. I've been with Rand for 10 years, so since fall of 2014. Prior to Rand, for about 3.5 years, I was at a startup targeted marketing company focused on social network applications. Before that, I was at a postdoc at Harvard, and then I did my PhD at NYU. My original PhD was focused on social networks and cultural learning in capuchin monkeys at my advisor's field site in Ecuador, but I had significant side projects as well in genetics and in human cultural data, which continued through my postdoc. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. Oh,
Cool.
just to dispel the confusion, Rand is headquartered in Santa Monica, California. We also have a very large office, probably larger than the Santa Monica office at this point, in Washington, D.C. And then we have some smaller kind of satellite-ish offices in Boston and Pittsburgh. And so I happen to be located at the Boston office.
Okay. And I've heard that's the best of the offices to be at.
It is.
Well, it seems like we got a pretty diverse group here, so this will be super helpful. I think we're all really interested in where anthropology can take us, depending on your background. Even a lot of you are doing stuff that's a lot different, I would say, than your background, but I'm sure what you've learned as an anthropologist has been very helpful in your current career as well. So I guess we'll just get into questions then, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so I guess the first question I have is, did you always know that you wanted a career outside of academia? I know some of you said that it was sort of circumstances that put you there, but was this something that you were always interested in or considering? Did you know that you wanted a career outside of academia, or, was it always the dream to be in academia, basically? Dr. Garcia, would you mind starting?
Yeah. The answer to this question, I think for me is a bit also, I can tell that my cats are going bonkers in the background. I apologize if it's disruptive. Hopefully it's not too bad. But yeah, so the short answer is like yes, and then no, and then yes again, as far as whether I wanted a job or a career outside of academia. I think when I was a non-traditional student, so I didn't go to get my PhD or my master's and PhD until I was, I think, 28 when I went to grad school. And so I had had a whole life and many careers prior to that. And I just went there truly for the pursuit of knowledge. And then I think I started, when you put that much, when you invest that much, as you all know, like there's almost blinders that get on of like, this is what you're doing. And as I neared the end of my PhD, I started having kind of more these things in the back of my head being like, do I really want to do this? But it was also intersecting with the time where I was increasingly competitive in the space. And I was fortunate to have both a postdoctoral fellowship at ASU and an NIH postdoc and Williams Butler Scholars, and I had gotten shortlisted. And I will say this is not the time to decide you want to leave academia when you get a job in academia. So I got a great tenure track faculty position at an R1 research institution. It was like my dream job if I were to want to stay in academia. But that was the time that I was like, I don't think I want to be in academia. And I think I had just had my head down, doing the stuff the whole time, that I hadn't paused for long enough to think about whether it was the right path for me. But it was when you're about to move across the country and up uproot your life again, that was when it really hit me. And that was when I made the decision to make the jump.
So I guess as a follow-up question then, what was it about academia that you decided didn't fit your life in that way?
I feel like I could ask any of the faculty members on this and they could probably answer for me. So for me, it was one, it takes, I don't know, I only have myself to compare things to, but it takes me quite a bit of time and effort to do really well on certain things like writing. I can do it very well, but it really takes me time. And I also was in a particular situation where, not particular, this is academia, right? Like I was a PI on an NIH R01, and that like managing that with teaching, with I had this awesome startup for this massive lab, with being on committees and writing papers. It's like it took all of the things that I loved on their own, but then when you put them all together, I was not able to enjoy any of that anymore. It was just so much stress and like a complete lack of work-life balance. And that was when I was like, I'm too old for this. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, and thank you for explaining that. I can see how that would be take away some of the joy from the pursuit of knowledge, like you were mentioning before. Okay. Dr. Gray / Peter, would you mind answering next?
And my answer will be a bit different and colored by the fact I am older. So my goal going into a PhD program was I wanted to be a professor and I wanted to end up at a large state school in the West. I grew up in Colorado Springs. I met my wife at UCLA. So we had family networks in Los Angeles. That led me to get a postdoc in LA for those 2 years and then getting hired at UNLV in 2005 when I had a 1.5-year-old. And then my second daughter was on the way. They're now in college. So I'm now an empty nester as of the last year. That meant we were close enough to family. So as our kids were growing up, they got to see a lot of family. My family in Colorado, Arizona, and California, plus my wife's family. And we couldn't afford LA. So that worked, even though we wouldn't have chosen Vegas on the map. It worked for many years, and academia overall worked until it didn't. So some of the pluses, the flexibility. I spent a lot of time with my daughters growing up because I had summer flexibility, scheduling flexibility on days like for pickups and stuff like that. So the flexibility is a plus. You're around interesting people, even in a city of Vegas that people think of for gambling and entertainment. UNLV was a hub of intellectual stuff. So you can always find interesting people on a campus. And I still think of campuses as kind of marvels of the universe. On the downside, by many years later, I was a full prof effective 2016. My income really didn't change. His base salary for about 6 years. I'm sliding back relative to inflation. And I have bills to pay, especially seeing college expenses coming. So pay is better outside of higher ed is my experience, and then lots of conversations with folks. I earn a lot more now than I did as a full prof after 17 years, even though the cost of living is pretty similar. And geography. Geography is hard to control. Let's say you don't want to live in certain places. In academia, for tenure track jobs, postdocs too, you often need to go where those jobs are rather than saying, I want to be close to family to raise my kids, and that means I can be here. So industry gives you a lot more possibilities to align the geography. So those were some of the pluses and minuses that ended up shaping my arc. But again, summarizing, I loved it till I didn't.
So there wasn't necessarily any one specific incident necessarily that pushed you out, but a combination of things, it sounds like, that just made it no longer make sense anymore. Is that accurate?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Dr. Kane.
Yeah, so I knew from the time I was 13 that I was going to grow up and study monkeys. And so discovering at 32 that I was no longer studying monkeys was really shocking and challenging. So basically, when I was in the last couple of years of graduate school, I was seeing friends who were in their 8th or 9th year of adjuncting and who were applying for their 4th postdoc. And I really didn't want to be in that position. I knew what making friends who are working at 3 or 4 universities in town and just like barely scraping things together. So I gave myself 5 years of being on the academic job market. That included applying for postdocs, that included applying for faculty. And I decided if I didn't have a job or feel like I was moving forward at the end of those 5 years, I would do something else. And that's basically what happened. I had a really solid postdoc. I wasn't as productive in terms of paper writing as I probably should have been to make myself a good candidate for academic jobs. I had a couple of interviews, but really nothing that I think I had 2 that went to campus interviews in 5 years, and I probably applied for 400 jobs in 5 years, between tenure track jobs, between visiting assistant professorships, between postdocs. And it was just clear at that point in time that something else needed to happen. And so I ended up, I'd been a pretty involved postdoc in the sort of academic structures and the postdoc association and stuff. And so when my postdoc funding ran out, I let pretty much everybody I know knew that I was looking for a job. I hadn't been successful at getting a non-academic job either. And so after about 6 months of being unemployed, I heard that somebody was looking for a program manager. And so that's where I am now.
And how did you sort of deal with the grief of letting go of a
Oh
job
man,
expected?
still.
It's kind of a heavy question, but
Yeah, it's rough because it was really more than half of my life where that was my identity, was that I was somebody who went off to the rainforest and studied monkeys. And um, then I all of a sudden wasn't. And so, yeah, it's a big piece of how you think about yourself and how you identify yourself. And I think for a lot of academics and grad students, so much of your life is wrapped up in what you do and why you do it and who you do it with. And it's hard to lose that piece. And so I don't know that I have a good answer. I still am able to, I try to keep my, toes dipped in the research world. And I'm still mentoring students through my postdoc who are helping finish up projects or do sort of side things. But it really is something that I personally felt was a loss to me, was losing that side of, I still miss my monkeys and the forest and stuff. But, I think I'm pretty satisfied with the life that I've made for myself outside of that structure. So yeah, pluses and minuses.
well, thank you for your honesty. I mean, it sounds like you have been very adaptable, which has been probably a reason why you're very successful in what you're doing now. But it's nice to know that you're still keeping and sort of aware of what's going on in the primatology field and stuff like that. So you're allowing yourself to still be a part of that world, which is really cool. So thank you. Dr. Matthews.
All right, real quick. I don't mean to cut, well, I do mean to cut in, obviously. But I just wanted to say thanks to Erin that you bring up a very good point that I think is a very real thing for a lot of us. Squaring like your identity and your whole social world, everything when you make the decision to leave academia is it takes a toll. It's very difficult.
Yeah, does everyone else sort of agree with all of that? I assume a little bit, if not a lot of it. Okay, Dr. Matthews, do you want to give us a little bit more context?
Sure. So the original question, no, I did not always envision myself doing an applied thing. Although I also would say I was not, I was never super committed to like that I was going to be an academic. I was really motivated by doing scientific research, and I was a primatologist. And so it seemed like the only way to do that for a living was to be an academic. But if that sort of makes sense. So then in my, I went to my postdoc, and for some of the reasons people have mentioned already, there were some personal reasons why I started looking elsewhere, which I had one child at that time during my postdoc. I have 3 now. And that was a priority for myself and my wife to have a family. And I mean, when I switched to the startup marketing company, I had postdoc offers on the table, right? But I didn't want to keep moving for postdocs. It was the salary is a factor, but I think the bigger factor was the geography, like the need to move like to other countries across the US, like that was just is difficult if you're trying to have a family, right? As I know people here probably know. So that was the biggest, I think, personal factor. I mean, the other thing is that I was also a bit frustrated with some of the, again, as someone who was really deeply interested in scientific research, I thought there were other, and I think this, there are other ways to do scientific research outside of the kind of university academic model. That's not the only place that good science is happening. And so I was getting, honestly, like a better reaction to my human cultural stuff than my primatology. And so that kind of opened up a lot more potential employers, right? Because I started publishing on human data, and so that created more opportunity for me to do something other than academia. Oh, thank you very much, Siobhan. I'm glad that's wonderful. Always glad to hear that someone has read the stuff. You wonder some days, right? What was the other thing I was mentioned? Oh, the kind of like personal loss that came up of yeah, that's a real thing, and I think for me the biggest thing was losing, some of the seeing some of my friends. I think I had better friendships, when I was in that academic world, because I had people with whom I shared really deep interests and kind of worldviews. At the same time, as our careers progressed, I saw these people less and less because of the geography thing, because we weren't all clustered together. So, we'd see each other at conferences and so forth, right? So yeah. I think for myself, at least, probably some people stay a little more balanced. I think my life outside of being an academic is probably more balanced now because I sort of resurrected hobbies that I gave up as a postdoc that I felt I had no time for, right? So like maybe this is also just a career progression thing, like when you're younger versus older, but like, I have a dog now, I have an RV, and we go camping once a month, and like I have hobbies. You see what I mean? Like I didn't like going to the Amazon and doing the primatology, like sucking up all of my hobby time. So I find that fulfilling actually, and brings some balance to things. I have hobbies that have nothing to do with Rand and Rand people.
I think that's a really interesting point to bring up is that I'm very new in my sort of academic journey, but the permission to have hobbies and enjoy doing other things outside of the schoolwork that you're doing, I imagine is quite different from what you're saying. And that the geography, I think, is a fear that a lot of other students have about sort of you're at the whim of what's available, who has spots for you and stuff like that. And so that geography factor seems to be a really big thing to be aware of. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Dr. Boyle.
Yeah. So just a heads up, I am going to mention sexual harassment and racism and what I talk about. So I wanted to be a research professor. I started my PhD program when I was 21, which I don't want to say I don't recommend because I don't know any of you. But for me, I do not think that was the best choice. I did have great mentors in my life from Boston University that encouraged me to do it, that I could do it. I did everything you were supposed to do. I applied for and got the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program Award. I started research. I did undergraduate research and then continued that through graduate school. I published papers. I was doing everything I was supposed to do. And then at the same time, in my PhD program at the George Washington University in DC, there were a lot of issues. And you can Google, I think it's called The Sexual Misconduct Case That Rocked Anthropology or something. There's an article about what GW was like when I was there, before I was there. And there were a lot of other issues with PhD and undergraduate students being harassed and assaulted. There was a lot of icky issues about wanting to attract African PhD students to the program, but then doing nothing to make opportunities equitable and accessible to them, and not really setting them up for success, but being able to say, we have a diverse program. So I was watching all this happen. I was watching people I cared about be hurt by each other, by faculty, and by the systems that are inherent in academia and federally funded research. And I kind of knew towards the end of my time in the program that I was much more interested in the people, like the anthropology of biological anthropology, like the people that are studying it, how do we make it easy for them to be successful? How do we make jobs in academia good jobs? And so I kind of use my postdoc as a way to pivot. So my postdoc was more in like science communication. And I used that year to look at opportunities outside of academia. So I live still in Washington, D.C., and the federal government is obviously a huge presence there. And I learned more and more about how does science influence what the government does, and then in turn, how does the government influence science? And so I applied for something called a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, which is run through AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And that program puts people with PhDs in the federal government. And that's where I met Dr. Cully when I worked at the National Science Foundation with her. And that really exposed me to the high level decisions that are made that impact the everyday life of all of you. And so I've sort of continued with that. And now I'm kind of working on how do we make entry-level jobs in the sciences good for unemployed and underemployed people. So I've just been exploring this whole bit of how do we make STEM jobs good, supportive jobs for the people that want them. And I would say similar to what's been said by the other panelists, the pay has been much better. I think right now is kind of a scary time given all the federal policy changes that are happening. And so I'm lucky to have an opportunity to work at the state government level. And also the hobbies piece too. My friends were all in my PhD program. My life was doing my research and being with everyone there. And now I have so much more free time and it's so much less stressful. I think my identity is a lot less tied in what my research is and my work and my grades, right? It's so much more tied to every other aspect of my life now.
Well, thank you for sharing that background. That's, I think, a big issue that only is now being openly discussed, I would say. I mean, I know it's been a problem for a while, but I appreciate that you shared that. Sounds like that also very actively pushed you away from academia for a lot of very good reasons, but also motivated you a lot to be where you are and the good things that you're doing now. So I think that's really good insight into how you got to where you are. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gonna skip over.
Yeah. I guess what guidance would you offer to anthropology students that are honing their skills right now in their programs, both undergraduate and graduate, to either work in academia or skills outside of academia, something maybe that could translate to both, or what skills maybe that you have that have helped you be where you are now? Dr. Matthews, would you mind starting? So what kind of skills worked well for you both in and outside of academia that you would want as advice for undergraduates or graduate students?
Yeah, so great. So my general recommendation for this is that it's really good to, like, if you're thinking about applying outside of academia, you want to emphasize and acquire some kind of like hard skills. So these are like specific things that you can do for an employer, right? So that maybe that's statistical analysis, maybe that's some kind of computer programming, maybe that's knowing how to do recruit and conduct interviews is like a thing, okay? Or how to thematically analyze qualitative information. Like you got to have like some kind of like concrete skills that you offer, and that's what you put onto your resume and how you've done those things. And I think people, when you're in kind of a grad program or a postdoc, you don't realize that people in industry are actually very, I think, open generally to different types of backgrounds. You know, if you can bring some clear skill set that they need to the company. So that was definitely the case in how I was able to kind of make that jump, right? I'd acquired some skills in doing social network data analysis. And so that was really what I was hired for.
So when you were applying, were you really emphasizing that on your resume and in your interviews?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, if I legitimately had a skill that they were looking for, then I would emphasize that particular thing. Yeah, yeah. Um, I interviewed at some other places too. Like another little nugget of advice would be sometimes when you're making a switch, this isn't just from academia, but really if you're switching between industries or something, right? Like often, you're not going to get hired by like the top 5 or 10 places in that new industry. Like you might need to go to, like I did, like a startup that had 12 people when when I was hired, right? And like most startups, we ended up not making any real return on the investment, right? We were just kind of controlling our burn the whole time. But I learned a lot, and met a lot of great people, got another job. So yeah, you have to be willing to go sometimes to these like smaller places, right? Like so you're into data analysis, but like you're not from that particular background or something, like probably Google isn't going to hire you. I interviewed at one point I interviewed at State Street, which is a investment bank in Boston, because I had some of the statistical modeling background they were looking for. And actually they're a more technical person who interviewed me. A couple of them were convinced I should be hired, but the kind of more businessy people, for them, my background was too divergent from what their experience was, I think. So I didn't get an offer there, right? So I mean, after my marketing startup, I probably could have gone back there, but then Rand is a much more interesting place to work for.
Hmm.
Um, well, I'd probably make more money if I got a job at a place like State Street, if I didn't get laid off in one of their perennial rounds of, what I mean, like cutting. So I think that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Um, how about Dr. Garcia?
Yeah, so guidance. I think I think as Luke said, um, I mean, being able to articulate your skills, because I think that a lot of people we have, like you all have a lot of hard skills, and soft skills which are equally as important. And I think it's almost in learning how to translate uh, what those things are into the language or the lexicon of the industry that you're going into. Um, for instance, I noticed that Peter, on both of our blurbs, we had end-to-end research or something like that. It's funny because like but that is what it is, right? When you can both like develop a research concept plan, execute it, collect the data, analyze, that's end-to-end research. And I think so part of it is just in learning the translations, things like, data storytelling. And I think also one of the things maybe that comes with even being a PhD trainee is that it's almost like we undervalue yourself. I'm sure that I'm not the only person that um, left their PhD with some amount of like insecurities that I did not have going in, which is a shame because it was actually when I had a lot of really strong skills. I just didn't quite know how to articulate them at that point. So I think, yeah, it's in the articulation of it. And for sure, as you're going through your careers, especially if you think that you want to explore careers outside of academia, think about the skills or the kinds of things that you want to spend your time doing. Um, so one of the things that I was able to pitch for my current position is I'm a mixed methods researcher. I have a pretty, it's kind of, I do both ethnography and quantitative analyses. I have a kind of an odd arc though, because I can, do all, and well, so yeah, being able to pitch that, but then like focus in on what do you want to do. Going back now, I think I would have, even though it was a really big, like, pain and it didn't seem worth it at the time. I wish I would have invested more in data visualization. Like I can do some rudimentary stuff, but I actually really like it. Like it's quite fun to me if I can just be, messed around in R and like making cool things. And so I think it's like identifying those things and making sure that you integrate that into what you're doing in your, like, what's the outcome of your PhD, right? Yeah, so I think translation, focusing on the things that you actually like to do. And let's see. Also, I mean, this is not so much about honing skills so much as it is, I guess, about like understanding what you want to do and where you want to go. It's like talk to people, just get in contact with people that are in jobs that might sound tangentially interesting or industries that are tangentially interesting, just to like figure out what it is that they do. I think that that can also help kind of people understand the landscape of everything that's out there, because there's a lot of stuff that's out there. And the last thing I'll say is I do think that there's not just like a sharp split between academic and non-academic careers. And I think someone else mentioned this of like having their foot still a little bit in academia. Like I'm still on, actually I talked to Siobhan about this. I'm leading a disability equity research project through the AAMC. And it's a very academic research, right? But I'm able to like, you just have to make a business case for it for your day job. See, it doesn't have to be like one or the other. Yeah.
That's really helpful because I hadn't really considered that you could kind of do both in a lot of ways if you're creative with it and stuff like that. And summarizing so far, it sounds like getting some sort of concrete skill is important, but also being able to translate that skill when you're looking for jobs is just as important as well. So those are both, and just talking to people, all of that is very good advice so far. Okay. Should we see Dr. or Peter, Dr. Gray, Peter?
So we're hearing skills and translation, and I would just add to that. There's also a set of skills I think many of us have related to teaching and facilitation that can be translated. So we talk about it differently in industry, supporting or managing or coordinating cross-functional teams, but it's being able to collaborate, like in my case, with folks in product design, content writers, strategy folks, to be able to help coordinate things so that we're eventually moving with research towards some kind of ends that align with objectives and key results, or OKRs. So what are the standards or metrics of success? Those differ here. I'm no longer judged by peer-reviewed journal articles and their citations, let's say, but instead, how am I helping move the needle for some other metric within the company, like some measure of customer satisfaction or some measure of customer like diminished problems using some aspect of the website, let's say. But just saying there's a whole suite of things, I think, around teaching and facilitation that probably are skills too many of us have and can translate. But how do you learn how to translate the stuff? I had no clue. So 3 years ago, and I'm only in Metro Charlotte because my wife got the job here. I was the trailing spouse, as it were, unsure what was next as I was offboarding, teaching my last classes remotely fall 2022 for UNLV, unclear at all where I was going to go or how I'd land, and frankly was incredibly scared, and a lot of negative emotions were driving the bus for me because I had a finite time to figure out a new solution in life, and it was very, very scary. Um, how do you get experience? We talk about experiential learning, so internships, let's say, for undergrad or grad students. I got feedback that I had been in higher ed 20 years. The last job I'd had before higher ed was I was a bellman. How does that translate? I have some customer service skills. Was that going to work for me at age 50? I don't know. And I just left Vegas, so I'm not going to be a bellman in Vegas, like Brandon Flowers of the Killers. So what am I going to do? I volunteered for a few roles, but I had the luxury of summer and then fall teaching my last remote classes. So it's like I got to run in order to figure out a solution in my limited time. So I took on a couple volunteer roles. One of those was with a startup that I volunteered for part-time for 5 months, and they eventually offered me a full-time job. So the part, like the startup aspect or local nonprofits or anything you can do to get experience. And for me, that was important to help me understand the language to use, to understand how the collaboration and coordination of groups works differently in these spaces compared to academia, to be more confident than when I'd be interviewing. But I could not do those things until I had enough experience in those spaces to be able to articulate in their terms why they should hire me and the value I could add. I had intuitions, but I was pretty beaten up and battered, honestly, by the time I left, and had a scarcity mindset of I'm just a failure. Uh, so much of academia is rejecting us. Why would anyone want me? So needing to get out of that because that's not conducive to success either. But experience, like any ways you can get experience. And I even did a 3-month internship. If you've seen the movie The Intern, like the Google guys, that was kind of me. And my manager was a guy 10 years my junior, and it was just 3 months, but I was kind of an experiment after interviewing for a senior role, not getting it, and asking, how can I get my foot in the door? That was the step. And you just do what you can in order to get that experience. That's advice. Get what you can, the experience to help you learn how to translate what you might already know into the terms that'll offer value in that industry space.
That is really good advice. Do you mind just sharing really briefly, like what you were doing with those startups when you were volunteering?
Applied research role. So first was with a four-person ed tech startup, and the guy leading that had had a couple successful startups launch in like HR companies in Silicon Valley, but it was on a shoestring budget. But that was just good, just to kind of get some initial experience and talk about product. And I mean, I was so clueless that at least was the start. And then that men's hormone and well-being startup, they aim to be the hymns for like the Silicon Valley elite folks, and they may well do it. So I was an applied researcher for them, collecting every scrap of user information to inform product decisions, working with an analytics and product guy most closely. But that was really interesting stuff. It drew upon my subject matter expertise in testosterone and male behavior in an applied setting, different pace, different collaborators, different endpoints. But again, I began to learn how to talk about this stuff. And when I was interviewing for jobs at places like Lowe's, if anyone knows Charlotte, which I knew nothing about 3 years ago, it's like Lowe's or finance. And TIA touches on that. So that's where I was going to get a job if I was going to get a job in person. I wanted to be in person, not online. And that allowed me to interview better for jobs after about 6 to 9 months that made the difference finally.
I think understanding the language for the industry that you're going into is a really great tip because you don't realize the specific terms and buzzwords and stuff that are used in these industries without having to talk to somebody about it first. So I think that's really excellent advice. Thank you. Dr. Kane?
Yeah, so I think a lot of things folks have already touched on are, knowing what skills you're developing and how they map onto skills that are in demand for jobs outside of a traditional faculty position. So, for example, I was managing the field site when I was doing my dissertation research in Cote d'Ivoire, and so that involved a whole bunch of different pieces in both West Africa and in Ohio. And then similarly, when I was working at Cheryl's postdoc field site, I was doing a lot of the program management there, a lot of kind of managing big pictures of grants and things. And so recognizing that the skills I was developing were really similar and being able to articulate, like, yes, this is looking at human clinical samples, not orangutan fecal samples, but I understand, how to manage data and how to track projects and deliverables for grants. And I've worked with, a bunch of NSF projects, but it translates to these big NIH grants that I'm helping manage now. So I'm still in academia, essentially. I'm in a faculty, or sorry, not a faculty role. I'm in a department in a medical school. And I was much less successful at articulating these things in a more industry kind of position. And one of the things that I really realized is like, yes, I've developed all of these skills in data analysis and writing and grant writing and program management, but there are also people who that's just their career. And they went to school and they did that out of they are trained in those things. And so they have really specific vocabulary and processes that I sort of squished together, and they worked for me in an academic setting and they work for me now. But one of the things that I've been working on as I'm still part of a university and can do continuing education with, tuition remission and things like that is trying to piece together all of those kinds of trainings so that when the NIH funding, falls totally out of the floor and I am looking for another job, which may be happening sooner than later, I understand, I can back up the skills that I've developed on the job with this sorts of language and other things that people are looking for when people have made this their primary career. And I think I had something else I wanted to mention, but I don't remember what it was. So maybe it'll come back to me while other people are sharing their expertise.
You. Did Dr. Boyle get back on for
I,
us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Can you remind me of I did not hear.
Oh.
I'm sitting outside with everyone else because
Oh.
the fire department's here. So.
Oh
Yeah.
no. Is everything okay?
I think so. Everything looks okay. But yes, please remind me which question we're on. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining back with us again, despite that. The question was just what guidance would you offer to anthropology students, both undergraduate and graduate, as far as the skills they're learning in their programs that would help with jobs outside of academia?
Thank you. So again, apologize because I'm not sure what everyone else said before me, but one thing that seems super obvious, but actually really helped me is being able to read things from multiple different disciplines. So I'm sure all of you in your undergraduate or graduate training, you're reading research papers, documents, summaries from across maybe even dozens of disciplines over the course of your academic career, right? And being able to do that and do that well is one of the biggest skills that I've applied to the jobs I've had since my PhD. So, for example, in science policy, when you need to write a policy memorandum and convince a policymaker, whether it's someone in a federal agency, somebody in Congress, you have to be able to convince them of an issue, why it matters, and what they can do about it. That means you often have to read a bajillion things in many different disciplines. You have to read legislation, you have to read a lot of legalese in some cases, and in other cases, you're reading scientific research in a field that you may not be familiar with. Being able to approach that with confidence, being able to summarize things that you're not an expert in, but you have a broad enough understanding to explain it to another person clearly. I think those are all invaluable for careers outside of academia.
I think that's really good advice. Some of the other participants had mentioned understanding what language to use when talking about what you know and what kind of jobs that you would be fit for, and understanding the language to use. And I think that relates really well to also being able to translate, academic papers in so many different departments and disciplines and stuff like that. So I think understanding how to sort of live in both of these worlds seems to be a really good asset for everyone. My next question is about differences in the application process for academic or non-academic careers. And I'd also be curious to know if emphasizing your ability to sort of live in both of those worlds, or having your background in anthropology, if that was helpful in getting the jobs that you have now, or if it was a hindrance, I suppose. Dr. Garcia, would you mind starting?
Sure. That's an interesting question, whether it was a help or a hindrance to have a background in anthropology. So there are very big differences, at least in, there are also a lot of different industries, and I think that the folks that are on the call right now represent quite distinct industries or areas of work, so that'll be cool to hear as well. But so from when I left academia, my first position was at a hospital, like a children's hospital it was still doing research, and that was very distinct from my current position. But the thing that unites them though is, well, I guess there's a lot of jobs. There's, in academia, when you're applying for faculty positions or lecture or adjunct, it's still it's quite narrow in scope as far as what you're looking at. And I think that the broader landscape is huge. And for people that I think that a number of people here, for people that do kind of distinct things in their in their academic careers, it makes it almost, for me, it's almost overwhelming to think about like how broad of a universe I could be looking in. Took me way too long to realize this, but I realized quite recently that I need to have like distinct resumes because I can play up the like when I got hired in my current position, I was a UX market researcher, which really leveraged like the anthropology side of things and like the, surveying and interviews and all that stuff. But I also I work in evaluation now, which plays up more of the harder skills. And if I want to go back into biosciences, so like you might need to have distinct resumes that like tease out or highlight the different skills that you have. Not to say that you shouldn't put them all in there, but just be aware that you might have to tailor your resume depending on the position. So there's a lot of jobs. They go more quickly. So it's not like there's once a year to apply or, once every quarter. But at the same time, the jobs that I've applied for have gotten like 400 applicants in a week, which is kind of wild to think about. And I think that part of that, though, is at least I think part of my success is also reaching out to the people that are the hiring managers or the people that are the recruiters to try to get a little bit of like a one-on-one with the person hiring, just to even say, can you give me a little bit more about this position, and like evaluate fit before you put your resume in. That's not going to happen in all cases at all. But if you're lucky, it can be very useful. It saves everyone time. Let's see. Yeah, and I think, I mean, depending on where you're applying and how you're applying for things, you want your resume to come to the surface, right? And I'm saying resume in the field that I'm working in. If I were to turn in my 14-page CV, that would be like a negative. I would not get it. Nobody would look at it. So I've had to distill it into like a 2-page resume. But you want to really make sure that you hone it in so that you're capturing this like the so what of what you do, like what do you do, so what, like why should they hire you, like what are you bringing, and make sure that that's like sharp. And then I think also I'm realizing this is a big question about I guess in short, there's a lot of differences in the application process. But there's a couple kind of similarities. Networking is still a thing. Like in academia, we network at conferences, right? Like we meet, or we get exposure, and then we also expose our research to others. And but you try to connect with people at different universities and expand that network. It's the same thing in industry. I mean, my current position in part was based on networking from having known somebody and reached out about another position at the company. So that's still a salient part of the way you can be successful in the space.
Do you think your anthropology degree was a help or a hindrance?
Oh yeah, I avoided that. I mean, I don't think it was a hindrance. I don't know. I think it's in the way that you articulate it. If I were to say, oh, I'm an anthropologist, some people that are like interested be like, oh, that's interesting, that's cool. But people don't know what that means really. They don't know how to translate. So then you have to translate that for them of like, it turns into things like user experience research or member-centered research or human-centered research. So it's like, again, I think it was a help, but you have to do I had to do the legwork to connect the dots of like what anthropology is to like what it means in the industry.
That makes a lot of sense, especially because anthropology covers so many broad areas. It makes sense that you would need to sort of translate it. Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. Dr. Boyle, we're asking about are there differences in the application processes for academic versus non-academic? And then did you feel that your anthropology background was a help or a hindrance when applying for jobs?
Yeah, I think the processes are a little bit different, like kind of what Angela just mentioned, just how long or short something should be in terms of your materials. A lot of the jobs I've applied for are like a whole kind of employment mechanism that I didn't know about until I got there. So essentially, for like 3 out of the last 5 years of my professional life, I've been paid a salary by a nonprofit who I don't work for day to day, and my day to day job has been in federal or state government. So there are all these weird ways to get to do what you want to do. They're sometimes called fellowships. You could be called an advisor, special advisor, senior advisor, policy advisor, senior fellow, fellow, policy fellow. There's all these weird mechanisms that until you know like kind of where to look and or someone tells you where to look, sort of like a hidden curriculum of this whole policy world, you don't really know where to find them. And so I think it's just been different in that regard that I've been applying to these kind of like not necessarily selective, but like rare opportunities, competing against other people with science PhD backgrounds who've also worked in government. So it's been really interesting to learn more about. And then I do think my anthropology background has helped me. I think I've been like my research was on fossils and monkey and ape skeletons. Like that's very, very specific. And it takes a lot of, I think, creative thinking to expand. It took a lot of creative thinking to figure out how I could apply what I learned to other careers. And so I think to the point that anthropology is so broad and a lot of folks don't know what that is, that's totally true. And for me, I've wanted to dabble in multiple fields. I've worked in public health. I'm working in life sciences right now. I've worked in alternative proteins, so like lab grown meat and plant-based meat products. Like because of my anther background, I've been able to find some angle that makes me competitive for those jobs. So I think it was helpful.
That's very encouraging. Thank you. Dr. Matthews?
Yeah, just to add to what's been said already, definitely people expect like a 2-page resume, generally a 1-page cover letter. I do think if you have presentations, publications, or just substantially completed projects to list on that 2-page resume, like in industry, Rand is a little different because we're semi-academic as a federal contractor, but like in industry, like people generally they don't see it as a prestige thing. They don't even recognize what journals are more prestigious or not. They don't care. But you can use those to show that you really have skills that you claim to have. That makes sense, right? So and in a typical industry pathway, people will do that on their resumes. They'll list specific projects they completed as like where they used a given skills. So it's not those aren't wasted things, but you want to only identify, it's like selected, right? You only want to identify the ones that are relevant to the skills that you're highlighting for this job application. Oh, and in terms of the anthropology, I don't know that that was particularly a help or a hindrance. But I think having having a PhD definitely has value for certain jobs. And so like I always recommend to people, like if you're thinking about this, like if you are like in your last year or two, it is worth your while to finish it out just to have that degree. Okay. That doesn't mean if you are considering doing a industry job that the PhD is the most straightforward path to riches. Okay. But what I mean is like if you're close and considering this, it is worth having it in the long run for your career, because yes, there are lots of employers that value it, and because of things that have been mentioned before, it shows you can do end-to-end research. It shows you can take on a big thing and think through it on your own, right? Yeah.
So asking for a friend, what is the most direct path to riches. Did you have any insight into that? No, just kidding.
No, I know this wasn't it, but right? Well, no, I just mean like there's various analyses of that, right? But the thing is with a PhD is, especially if you have PhD and then postdocs, you have a lot of deferred earnings, right? You have a lot of years early in your career where you didn't make that much and you didn't really save for kids' college tuitions and retirement and so forth. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, sometimes I just mean like, but you could ask an economist about these things, but right. So it's like, yes, like I make more now, but I made a lot less then. And so, some of my friends who, just got a bachelor's degree and then just did other things. One of my friends in town here is an actuary, and he's pretty involved. He's one of the people who helps grade actuary exams, so forth. He works for one of the health insurance companies, right? But like, so, but his like earnings path was different than mine over the course of the career. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Dr. Kane?
Yeah, so I think it really depends what you want to do, whether anthropology is a help or a hindrance. And so one consistent problem that I found was that one of my like first paths out of academia was to start applying for jobs at different like the Audubon and other organizations that are working in ecology issues in Massachusetts, where I live now. And like I said earlier, there are people who focused on the environment in Massachusetts as their training and their plan from the get-go. And so being able to transfer, like, yes, I can do all sorts of ecological surveys, but my encyclopedic knowledge is of plants and marshes in the Ivory Coast. And so there's like, I think not having a traditional background can be detrimental if there are like sort of high demand roles that you're interested in. So there are lots of people who went in with, environmental and natural resources degrees from the state school that have that training already. And so it can be, it can be detrimental to you. It can sort of act against you. Even if I have the skills at a more theoretical level, I don't have the practical skills. Having a PhD is what got me this job. Basically, they were like, we just need somebody who can sort of write and read, scientific papers and pull together papers. And, so I think that I echo what Luke said, that if you're almost done, that like just stay the course and finish. But if you think that you want to do something outside of traditional academia, really think deeply about whether going to graduate school is going to get you close to what you want to be doing ultimately. Yeah, and like was said earlier, I think the biggest challenge for me was figuring out what options there were for me to do outside of academia, because I had been so focused for so long. And so like Angela said, I had my like, here's my ecology resume, and here's my program management resume, and here's my grant writing resume, and here's my data analysis resume and cover letters and stuff. And so thinking about how you can sort of package your background to fit different possibilities is important. And it's something that you get really good at when you're applying for jobs in an academic context too, because you start to spin out all of these futures and research programs and things. So it's also probably a skill that you have. It's just trying to figure out what the opportunities are, because there's just so many different possibilities beyond being a faculty member.
Yeah, it does seem like that is one of the bigger challenges, is even figuring out what would be appropriate to apply to and how you can sort of mold your resume to fit that. But yeah, that's all really helpful. Peter?
I was in higher ed long enough that my version of understanding of hiring was tenure track faculty job searches or long-term non-tenured lectureships. And I had to unlearn a lot of that. And I was exactly what you guys have just described, is I'm entering a wide wilderness 3 years ago, completely unaware of what my options are or where to start, and it was overwhelming. So what did I learn, and what advice would I share? Networking is hugely helpful. My network in academia of 20 some years was not helpful in this transition. I was starting from scratch. LinkedIn was hugely helpful. I also moved to a city where I knew no one, so that didn't help. But I was starting from scratch. And LinkedIn is a way to connect with folks, including cold, who are in roles that look of interest, maybe at companies that look of interest, and then ask if they'd be willing to have say a 30-minute informational interview. And I had about 60, 65 of those, I think, in my transition process. Those were ways to understand what the skills are, what the day-to-day is in different roles to eventually align with, okay, this is where I think I want to go. One of the cold info interviews I had summer 2022 was with an ex-psychology faculty member who worked at TIAA, and her story really resonated, and now she's a colleague of mine.
Hmm.
So there's a path there. So informational interviews, networking, LinkedIn is a huge way to leverage this. You also have Handshake, but I think that's more useful within academic spaces than outside of academic spaces. But I was just like you guys have already said, I was learning from scratch how to navigate this stuff. And those are ways I learned about what paths there are to then align with how do I get experiences and build skills and talk the talk that will get me hired. Um, and I think it said about 70% of jobs are filled without formal searches. So your networking can also be a way to create an opportunity once they know you, like happened with me in that one startup company where I volunteered for a while. They created a role for me after they saw what I could do. So those are ways, especially in a tight job market, to think creatively that it's not just what you see advertised on LinkedIn that are getting 400 applicants almost immediately. And it's really demoralizing when you see those numbers. But what can we do to try to creatively create opportunities that align with our skills and value we can offer?
That's really helpful. And I do think the practical advice of informational interviews is really excellent advice. So thank you, definitely. As we're sort of, I think, wrapping things up here, my sort of final question for you guys would be any specific parting suggestions for academics thinking of making the jump into a non or more non-academic career? And then also my second part is a little bit of a harder one of, do you have any regrets about being in a non-academic career? Can we start with Dr. Kane?
Yeah, so I think I would just commend people for being at, in graduate school or in undergrad and thinking about what other options there are than the faculty who you see doing really cool things. I wish that I had spent more time doing that before I made the sort of really focused leap into graduate school and postdoc and sort of went down that track really heavily. Um, I don't really have any regrets. I enjoy being employed. I enjoy being in sort of a stable place in my life. So I've lived in Boston since 2017, and I'm really happy here. And I'm glad that I'm not bouncing from adjunct to adjunct or trying to scramble from postdoc to postdoc. I think that my self-esteem is a lot better because I'm not failing constantly. And I've like been able to build a life that I enjoy, and I still get to do, like I said, I still get to do the little bits of primatology where I can. Um, but yeah, no big regrets.
Good, that's good to hear. Peter, do you mind jumping back in again?
One bit of advice is try not to go it alone. So if you can find community, which is much easier to do as a grad student or postdoc or at like early career stages, to find folks to share conversations with about this, it's really, really helpful. I think there's a socio-emotional aspect of this. Identity's been mentioned. This is often a huge identity shift when you've invested so much of your blood, sweat, and tears into something that you're then giving up, willingly or not. It's a lot. And funny enough, I'm now at TIA. I focus largely on folks approaching retirement in higher ed, say often in their 60s. We hear similar things. These are folks who've been in higher ed for, say, decades. We hear the same things about identity and how hard it is to give up that piece of who they are and how do I create new meaning and hobbies and how do I use my time? What's my purpose? So, funny enough, if you stayed in academia, you'd have that, like Lee and Siobhan, you'll have those issues to deal with at some point of what hobbies will I have and how will I find purpose after I retire as a professor? But find someone, because I did not have folks to talk to as the full prof going through emotions and experiences with no one to speak with as a peer about what I was feeling to know that this was actually normal. There's a great group out there for PhDs called Recovering Academics. You can Google them, and they were a terrific socio-emotional support group for me once I found them in latter part of 2022 that was distinct from the mechanics of converting a CV to a resume, let's say, just because it helped me realize I'm not alone with stuff I'm processing. So just acknowledging the advice of try to find others with whom you can share in this process, given it can be a pretty emotional process.
I
And
think
no
that's
regrets, by the way. No regrets. So we had a check-in question in my current job last week of would you have changed your major? And for a couple of us ex-academics, it was, well, we didn't have to change our majors because we started over, midlife in another career path, but it's rejuvenated me. I was someone who's just driven by ideas and curiosity, and I'd lost some of that spark, but I feel like I've regained it in a way that's better aligned with who I am as a 52-year-old person now, an empty nester, versus the 20-something-year-old who went into grad school not knowing who I would be 20-some years later.
I think that's really helpful advice and just good insight in general, especially talking about that socio-emotional, that sort of connection that we often neglect, especially when we're talking about our career and life changes. So that's, I think, really important to mention. So thank you. Dr. Boyle?
Yeah, I would say, especially if you're thinking of doing something like outside of the anthropological sciences, I think it was mentioned earlier that learning the language of the discipline you want to be in is really important. And I think the way that I found is most helpful to do that is using social media and newsletters to both like passively and actively absorb that language, absorb the information, and absorb who the major players are. That has really helped me. So, like, for example, right now I'm working on like biotech workforce strategy. I know about biotech, like theoretically. I took a lot of biology classes. I know how to apply that to a biotech career, kind of. I have friends who work in biotech, but I don't know I'm not an expert in the landscape. So what I've been doing is thinking about, okay, let me follow some local biotech organizations, like both nonprofits, research organizations, follow them on LinkedIn, see if they have a newsletter. I've been looking for newsletters about local science workforce issues. I've been following those. You'll occasionally find a journalist that specializes in this area. I'll make sure to follow them. And so like every day I'm getting information sent to my phone, my computer that you read right throughout the day when you're on your phone. And that has, in the span of like 2 weeks, has transformed what I know about what's going on, where the opportunities are, and all of typically, especially if it's in a newsletter, it's going to have job postings. So that's the best way I've found as I've pivoted through different sectors and disciplines. Just absorbing the info as much as you can from those areas has been super helpful.
That is really excellent practical advice. Do you have any regrets about your switch?
I don't think so. So this is a very timely convo. So my PhD program, the Paleoanthro program at UW, had their 25th anniversary about a month ago. And so they did like a whole 2-day event, and there was lots of fancy food and people from very famous, amazing faculty members and students were all there. And me and some of the other people that left academia were texting after, and we were like, wow, that made me really nostalgic and a little bit sad, but I'm really glad that that's not my life anymore. Like, I remember the reasons why I left when I was there in that room with all of those people, even though I can appreciate that that could have been my life and maybe I would have enjoyed it. I enjoy this one too. So
I think that's that's funny that you had that anniversary just recently, but awesome. Thank you. Dr. Matthews?
Hey, yeah, not too much to add. I don't have any particular regrets about taking a non-academic kind of job. Yeah, I think at some point, maybe it was Shaban or someone said that, we should, not think of maybe people taking these jobs as like completely leaving the discipline or the kind of scientific community. I think people who know me or know my research don't think about myself that way, right? Even when I was at the startup, I sort of still went to the conferences sometimes and was publishing things occasionally. I mean, at a slower pace, but just because I enjoyed being you know, I want to contribute to that community, and some people don't do that. But I think, you know, there should be, it would be good if we had some more openness to kind of just like that kind of cross involvement. You know, and that's related to the helping to solve the geography thing. You know, I mean, that's the nature of the kind of academic job market, right? But it is funny when you're I find a lot of people who are in that market don't realize like the only things like it are like um you know, being in the military or maybe the Catholic priesthood. I mean, it is very strange, the movement geographically, and it is a major factor. And so you know, my older brother was a doctor in the Air Force for 20 years, and I think he actually really loved being in the service, and he would have continued doing it, but he just couldn't take the moving anymore, right? He has kids, just couldn't do it, right? So he retired, and you know, now he's in the private sector, practicing medicine. So, but yeah, that's why I say that, right? Because that's like, you know, so in that case, he was active duty, right? But they move you every 3-ish years or whatever, because that's their practice. So,
Do you have any regrets? You said no, right?
no, I don't have any, no, I don't have any regrets about that transition. You know, I mean, yeah.
All right. Great, thank you. And then Dr. Garcia, I think you're our last send
Yeah.
off.
So I'll start with the regrets and then end with the suggestions. Um, no, I think in the spirit of like you know, life history theory and Evo Devo and everything, it's trade-offs. Like there are always trade-offs. There are some things that I miss, some of the intellectual banter, but it's really like the really specifics of like, you know, theorizing about a gene environment interaction and stuff like that. But that doesn't have to completely go away. I still get beers every couple weeks or months with some former colleagues where we can talk about that stuff. And I also have kind of a little side hustle as a research consultant where I still work on some grants and stuff. And so I can still fulfill that part of my life. So ultimately, no regrets. Just think about it as trade-offs. And also, I think that's with the parting suggestions. I think it's important to think about what we enjoy, like both topically, but also practically. Like, how do you like to spend your time? What are your passions? What are your personal trade-offs? You know, this is something I think that everyone should pause and think like in your life, what are your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, and like needs to avoids? The idea, the whole thing of like always uprooting and moving, that's really hard on friendships, relationships, family, everything, right? And there's like I didn't come from money, and for me, financial stability was important, and I think it's been echoed a couple times here, but the difference in income is it's striking between academic and non-academic and academic adjacent or non-academic positions, and I think that that's something that, you know, we all have our own trade-offs, but think about what yours are. And that's, yeah, and then just put yourself out there. Like,
I think acknowledging trade-offs is really good advice, and trying to understand within yourself what is a non-negotiable and what is your greatest interest, stuff like that is really, really good advice, as well as putting yourself out there. So thank you everyone for answering these questions. I think we're just going to try to finish off with a couple of questions here and there, and then that'll be it, I think. How do you want us to do questions? Do you want people just to raise their hand, or does anyone have any questions? Any of our viewers here?
It's like Zainab has got a question.
Yeah, Zainab, do you want to go ahead?
So first of all, thank you so much, Siobhan, for organizing this, Kristine for moderating so wonderfully, and everybody for being here. My name is Zainab Gersel, and I'm the Graduate Program Director in Anthropology, and I can't tell you how much I've appreciated all of your time and insights. This is a part of my job that I really like, and I took it because I so appreciated what you shared, Dr. Boyle, because I went to Berkeley Anthropology, which was notorious for breaking people. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to tear you apart. And then they just leave you with an arm over there, and a leg over there. And I had had a whole life like Dr. Garcia before grad school, and I still felt very broken at the end of it. So I wanted to, like, my goal as grad program director is how do you break people less, or how do you let them graduate with a little bit more of their self-esteem intact? Um, and on the moving issue, I mean, many of our graduate students are actually international students. So by the time they have started their PhD, they have already often uprooted their entire life to be here. So I'm wondering if you could give me some advice on, like, first of all, do you wish that anybody within your PhD program had started having these conversations with you? And then I'd really love advice on the how of that, because I think the model has been there aren't enough jobs in academia, and therefore some of you should think about alt-ac careers. The problem with that is it kind of still continues to set academic careers as what everybody should want if they could get it. Whereas I genuinely believe we don't ask often enough, what is it that you want? What would you enjoy? Like, it's like once you made the choice to go to grad school, it's as if now you've made that choice, like Peter's example, for the next 20 years. And it's like, well, how can I introduce conversations, and should I, about, is this still what you want to do, without it seeming like I'm implying, maybe we should think of some other options for you because you're not going to cut it. Like, I just really love, because I'm worried that, yeah, I'm surprised that there aren't more students on this call. And definitely, like when I was in grad school, being on a call like this would have been perceived as a maybe she just doesn't think she's good enough type of move. So I'm just really looking for any kind of advice you might have so that I can foster these conversations without making it seem like I'm saying I don't think you guys are going to succeed. I really would, that would be the last thing that I would want to do. Or is it just like not my place at all? And instead I should be saying, go have these conversations with others and then come to me and I can help you with that 14-page CV you're putting together,
Thank you. That's a really good question. Does anyone have?
I would love
I'll
to
jump in first. Go ahead.
One, thank you for sharing everything that you just shared, and this question, because I wish that I had someone when I was going through my PhD program that checked in and said, are you sure that you want to do this? Or like, do you want to explore other things? And I was competitive. I was competitive in academia, and which made it weirdly even, I don't want to say harder because I don't know the other side of that experience. But people really did not understand my decision to leave. And I didn't have anyone to talk to because nobody got it. And I think that it is totally the place of people in your position and people and academics, like faculty, to present to, I think it's about normalizing. It's like a culture shift needs to happen where you normalize there's so many different careers. And that's one of the things I think that also makes it harder when you're leaving, because the notion of an academic position is held so highly that why would you ever leave if you can get it, And so then if you do leave, it means you're not good enough. But that's like going back to also what Luke said about the military. I have thought about that more than once. The parallels between academia and military, even in that notion, right? Like the whole social, this hierarchical, I don't know what exactly we'd call it, but the fact that we elevate an academic career so much higher than other careers. But that again, it's like that is the culture of academia that needs to shift. And so having conversations actively and checking in with students and saying, hey, and maybe even I just actually participated in a thing at Notre Dame. It was their first ever like workshop on careers outside of academia. And it was pretty cool because they had a couple people there that had jobs outside, and it was a couple day event, and it was about actually like like let's look at the CV and let's translate it into a resume. Let's look at all these different things, and that I think things like that can be really useful. And I also want to say, I know that people say, if you've gotten to the end almost, there's value in having a PhD. I will also say there's nothing wrong with quitting your PhD. Sorry, everyone, academics. It's true. It's not, it does come at a cost sometimes, like very much a physical and mental cost. And if it's not worth it, there's nothing wrong with quitting. That's it.
I think it's really important to have this conversation with undergraduates before they make the decision to go to grad school, because I know for me, I loved everything about being an undergraduate, and the path that I saw was to then go into graduate school and just do all of the best parts of undergrad, but more intensely and more awesomely. And I think being honest with undergraduates about what the academic job market looks like, what academia and academic structures look like, and how things are changing based on funding and things, and all of the other options for doing the things about your undergrad in anthropology that you love. Because I have loved working with all of the faculty I've worked with, but respectfully, none of them were able to set me up for what I'm doing right now and for many of the careers that people have talked about. And so I think there's a major role for anthropology faculty, but I think a lot of it also lies in understanding the expertise that people who aren't academics have, and where academics have a role and where it's important to kind of rely on folks who are outside of your departments to bring in their expertise and to talk about what they're doing and how they can help guide undergraduates or graduate students into other ways of being an interesting person who's contributing in academic or in intellectual or whatever ways that they find are important.
I would just briefly add, I shared in the chat a link to something called imaginephd.com. It's targeted towards PhDs and social and postdocs in the social sciences and humanities, but I've used this as a career exploration tool, and maybe doing this with every first year graduate student cohort. The tool doesn't really focus on the discipline areas that you're interested in, but it focuses on like your like personal values as a human being in the workplace, your translational skills, what you're interested in doing with your time at work. And I think that could be a good level setting thing. And I think I will definitely agree about normalizing it, just having that convo with everyone, not just when a student's in crisis or hasn't been showing up to things or seems disengaged. Doing it with everyone often is going to be what changes the culture.
Anybody else want to add anything to it? Otherwise, I think this has been a really excellent
I
response.
will also say that I think all of you are good anthropologists because all of you showed examples of using ethnography, like doing hardcore ethnography to make this transition. So, I mean, I've just been sitting here going, yeah, you're all ethnographers. And, but thank you so much. This has been so helpful for me. I'm sure it's been helpful for the others, but I really appreciate it. And just know that I will keep your words close at heart when I think about what to do for next year for students.
I guess I'll take us out if that's okay. I'll just again thank everybody so much for your contributions to the conversation today. I wish we had like another 3 hours to keep going because there's so much to talk about. I had like trouble at various moments not tearing up because so much of what you say resonates both on the hard points, but also like the joy that you can experience in these different kinds of roles. So thank you really for everything that you added to this conversation. And I just hope we can kind of keep the channels of communication open and create more opportunities for ongoing, discourse. And like seeing Luke at the conferences is always really joyful for me too. And getting to participate with you all in these different spaces has been so wonderful. So thank you so much for all of that. Thank you so much, Kristine, for moderating. This has been a great panel. And hopefully if the students or anybody wants to be in touch, if you guys just let me know what opportunities there are. And otherwise, yeah, we will hope to see you again at one of the upcoming, someplace we can co-organize something. So thanks again.
And thank you, Professor Cully, for organizing.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
You killed it, Kristine.
Who said that?
Eva.
Okay. All right.
Everyone feeling inspired?